Welcome to Paranormal M, the place where mysteries unfold and chills take over. Subscribe now and turn on notifications to stay updated. Let the thrill of the unknown capture your imagination. The drums and the shadows. When I was 18, I dated a girl my parents did not approve of. And because of this, I ended up moving out of my house and living in my car. Her house was in a very rural area, and so I would park my car at the entrance to an old field, walk across it and through some woods to her house. I'd hang out with her, then go back to sleep in my car at night. This went on for several weeks. I never felt scared traversing the woods or the fields at night. At first, as my girlfriend's dogs would follow me the whole way and then return home especially. But then came the night I reached my car and the dogs had not followed me. I could faintly make out in the distance to the north the sound of drums. They were like tribal drums, the kind you hear in films during a ceremony or ritual, a slow and steady beating. As I stood by my car listening, trying to identify what was happening, the realization hit me. About a mile or so to the north was located a cult on a dead-end road I had heard about as a young teen. I don't know what they were into exactly, but talk in my small school had been of animal sacrifices and your typical creepy goings-on. My mind immediately seized upon that as the obvious answer. They were doing some kind of ritual, and the sound was carrying through the thick woods that separated them from me. Got into my car and I tried to get some sleep. A few hours later, I woke to the sound of growling and something hitting my car from underneath. I have no clue what it was, dogs, coyotes, but after that happened, I was much more on edge crossing the woods in the field at night. I heard the drums almost every night after that. Then one night after climbing into my car, I looked out the windshield and I saw a human shadow figure standing in the field I'd just crossed. The form silhouetted against the lighter night sky. I was startled, but I assumed it was my girlfriend's stepfather, who otherwise didn't know I was camping out there. Thinking he perhaps followed me and my, whole gig was up, I turned on my headlights to light up the field and face him. But when I did, the field was empty. I was so shook by this that I just drove away and slept in the parking lot of a country church. It wasn't long before I came to my senses and got away from that girl. That ended my experiences for a while. About a year later, however, I began attending a church about 30 miles away. I found out that the youth pastor actually lived about a mile north of where I had those experiences. In fact, the youth pastor lived on the dead-end road where the cult was located. When I found out, I asked her if she had ever experienced anything paranormal from the cult. She told me the cult had actually been gone for about a decade. She had moved into the street a few years, and that's apparently when they had left. Or rather, a few years after they had left. However, she began to tell me about her experiences when she first moved there, of hearing drums outside and her young daughters talking about seeing the shadow people who ran around the trees that encircled their property. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It clarified and verified what I had experienced. She then told me she had done some research on the history of the area and learned that it had been frequented by Native American tribes due to a fresh spring nearby. So, what I assumed to be a cult was a paranormal event somehow connected to them, I believe. Some time later, I dated a girl who lived about 2 miles south of where I had my experience. When I brought up what happened to me there and the youth pastor's explanation of her experiences at her home, my girlfriend freaked out, telling me that her mother would sometimes take a bottle of alcohol out into the woods, only to come back hours later drunk and insisting that she had been, in her own words, dancing with the Indians. We broke up not long after. But one night she called me terrified, asking me to come over because she was being attacked by an unseen entity that was shoving her around in her room. I drove over and gave her some inspirational music to put on. She asked me to stay until she would fall asleep, and as I sat there while she lay in bed, a shadow form appeared in her room, floating up near the ceiling in the corner and emanating darkness like it was glowing black. Somehow I boldly faced it. I prayed silently for it to go away, and in moments, it just vanished. Then she spoke up, and I thought she was asleep. Asked if I'd just been praying. I told her yes. And she said, something was just here, wasn't it? I told her yes, and thankfully that was all that happened. I left, then I went home. It's been over 20 years since then. Never had any experience like that again. My boss and the cloaked figure. I had a boss years ago with whom I was very close. We were of the same faith. He was even a minister in it. And furthermore, he had officiated at my wedding, and my RN wife had basically delivered his child when his wife's midwife was late to their home birth. We were thus quite close. A few years after our wedding, he suddenly had an epiphany as he viewed it, and his religious perspective and practice changed drastically almost overnight to a very different position that he believed that I too should adopt. It caused a strain in our entire relationship as he began to insult and mock my faith even while I worked for him. It developed into a very negative daily environment for us both. One day not long afterwards, while at work, I watched as a figure appeared suddenly in the room that we were in and run toward him. It looked like a person in a hooded cloak, completely brown, like a stylized monk or a druid, or often popularly portrayed. Its face was obscured by the cloth. The figure rushed up from behind him and disappeared right as it reached him, as if it vanished into his body. I'm not one to typically see spirits, thankfully, but this was right in front of my eyes in the daylight, although the figure was slightly translucent. Kind of freaked out and told him immediately what just happened. He became understandably aggravated and wanted to know what that was supposed to mean, but I was just as mystified as he was. His behavior toward our faith grew increasingly antagonistic in the coming months, which was so different from his usual amicable and loving disposition. He believed I was somehow a heretic for not accepting the validity of his religious epiphany. Claimed that in a decade, I would no longer even have any faith as he zealously proclaimed the superiority of his own new religious views. The strangeness culminated when I called in one morning to let him know my grandfather was dying and I was going to be with him that day as he passed. He gave me the choice to say goodbye to my grandpa and come on into work or just quit right there. What a bastard. I couldn't believe he was forcing me to choose, but I made the right choice and thanked him over the phone for the opportunity to work for him, said goodbye, and went to be with my grandma for his last moments. Grandpa. It's been over 10 years now, and I've seen him only one time since, and ironically, while I've increased my religious practice over the years, I found out that he's left the faith altogether, no longer religious in any capacity. Many times I've wondered if the robed figure I saw that day at work running into him was some kind of a spirit of confusion or deception that took him further away from his established faith. I still mourn the loss of that beloved friendship. Sometimes people change and they change away from you. Woman in White on a Haunted Farm in Brazil. My name is Walter, and I'm an enthusiast of supernatural things. I already had some experience that soon I want to tell here, but now I want to tell and show something that just happened to my brother. First, I'd like to say that I'm not so good at, or Not so good at English, even though all this time I've been living here. Still taking some classes. I'm originally from Brazil, but I live in Los Angeles since 2015. Okay, let me start. My brother is 7 years older than me. He works for a paper and cellulose company. I think this company is the biggest of one of them in the world, so it has a lot of money, and when it started been building, they started to buy all farms around the city and surrounding cities to plain eucalyptus, or plant. For those who don't know, they make paper with eucalyptus wood. My brother works driving the big tractor, and I don't even know the name in English. It has something like claws to stack the eucalyptus trunks. He works in a rotating shift, sometimes day, sometimes during the night. He told me once that some farms are old. They have cemeteries, and the eucalyptus plantation surrounds the cemetery. Sometimes he works at night close to it. He doesn't like to work close to the cemetery. Well, last week he was working at night in one of these farms, very haunted according to some of his friends that already saw some weird things. It was a crew of 4 3-machine tractors and 1 mechanic to support just in case one of the tractors breaks down. Now let me say exactly what my brother said. He said he was working and the mechanic was close to him inside the truck. My brother was like watching him. He notices that he was acting weirdly. He was inside the truck, got off holding the cell phone, and started to walk straight behind the eucalyptus stacks that we can see in the picture. My brother said he wondered what was going on and thought he went behind the stack to poop or to pee. Okay, so my brother got off the tractor to talk to the mechanic. He said to my brother that he was in the car when he suddenly saw someone walking. He focused his flashlight and saw the woman and took the picture. She kept walking, and the moment that my brother saw him walking, the guy said he put his cell phone to record and went after her, but she disappeared. I love this picture because it looks so clear, and I like it more because my brother was a witness. We need to be able to see these things. Humming ghost. This happened to me when I was 18. I was laying in bed trying to go to sleep. It was real quiet when all of a sudden I heard this little girl humming, and I have no brothers or sisters. She sounded like she was trying to hum Greensleeves, or the tune to What Child Is This? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I thought it was just my mind playing tricks with me because it was so quiet. But then the humming grew louder. The humming was from a little girl, but the hums were broken as if she was trying to remember a song. So she was trying her best, and it definitely sounded like Greensleeves. My mind panicked, and the first thing that flew out of my mouth was, No, this isn't happening. Nope, not tonight. Jumped out of bed, still saying nope, and putting in a DVD movie to listen to drown out the little girl. I remember saying, Nope, I feel sorry for you, but I can't help you. Leave me alone. After hurriedly putting in the movie, don't laugh, it was the Three Stooges. The old movies, something loud and silly. I literally cranked the volume up to max and got in bed and let the sucker play all night like that. My heart was beating so fast, and I remember just praying the humming would go away. I went to sleep, and it eventually stopped. The next morning, I had to tell my mom. I told her everything. When she asked me what song the girl was trying to sing, I said Greensleeves. I tried to show her how she hummed it. So I began humming. After I stopped, the little girl began humming again, louder, showing exactly how she sung it. My mom's eyes widened and the hair on the back of my neck stood on end. After around 15 seconds, she stopped humming. Never have heard the girl again. It's been 7 years. I hope never to. My family has had experiences of ghosts before. I've had paranormal experiences as well. But this case was just terrifying because this ghost acknowledged me. I don't think it had anything to do with the house since it was fairly new. I have heard that in our area there's a ghost of a girl that travels from home to home every so often. Crying girl in our cabin. My family rented a cabin in Helena, Georgia. It was 3 stories tall and was pretty much right in the center of town. Stayed for a week, and about 3 days into our stay, weird things started to happen. My aunt and grandma, who stayed on the 2nd floor, along with my mom and dad, who had their own room, started hearing things. They said they heard a little girl crying at night. I didn't pay much attention to it. My aunt and grandma are pretty jumpy when it comes to staying in new places. I thought they just heard a TV going because there was a TV in each of our rooms. 4 days into the trip, my aunt and mom are sitting on the couch and they hear a girl say in a very distressed and breathy voice, "Mama." My mom yelled for me. I was out on the porch in the cabin. They asked if I had hollered for her, which of course I didn't. Now, my mom, grandma, and aunt were all scared. They were afraid to be left alone in any part of the cabin by themselves. I tried not to pay attention to it because we were on vacation. I wanted to have a good time hanging out in the cabin. Wanted to have a good night's sleep too. So, thinking about ghosts just wasn't on my mind. Until that night, my husband and I had the top room of the cabin. We turned off the TV and went to sleep after a long day of walking around town. I woke up out of a dead sleep and I started hearing a girl crying. Small, moaning sobs. I went real quiet, stopped breathing to hear if it was just in my mind or my ears playing a trick on me because I'm thinking it might be one of my family members' TVs playing. Nothing. The sounds were definitely coming from inside the room. Went back in my mind about 6 years ago to when the ghost of a little girl started humming in my room and the fear and panic of that experience flew over me again. I grabbed the smart TV's remote, turned it to some cartoon or a movie and turned up the volume. Like it was pretty loud. My husband turned over to complain how loud it was and asked me to turn it off. Absolutely not. I'm not turning it down or off. He got agitated and asked me why did I have it so loud. I told him I would explain it in the morning. The sobs eventually died out over the sound of the TV. The next day, I told my husband what happened and told him that we only have 2 nights left. I'm going to leave the TV on loud to just get ready for it. I was afraid to hear the little girl cry again, and to be honest, I was super upset about it. I was ready to just up and go home. So the next night passes and the TV was kept on and loud. Nothing that night, except mine, my husband's ears hurting, and a sleepless night. The last night was a doozy. I was so tired that I went straight to sleep and left my husband watching TV, but I asked him to please, before he went to sleep, start a movie or whatever, just keep the volume up. He promised, and I went to sleep. Then I woke up again out of deep sleep to the sound of how quiet it was, and the panic shot through me. The TV wasn't on, and I can't swear on the Bible, but I think I could hear the little girl crying again. I looked at the TV and had on the screen something to do with playback issues. It was a smart TV with a Roku, so I was doing everything I could. The remote buttons wouldn't work, and I was freaking out like it wouldn't let me move out of the error screen. So I somehow had to restart the TV to get it to come back on and actually play something. After fiddling around for more than I would care to, it actually started up and let me scroll to a movie to play. Once again, the volume was turned up. I think whatever was in that cabin had something to do with trying to stop the TV from playing. I was happy this was our last night in the cabin. Never stay in Helen, Georgia ever again. Empty stall. There was this antique mall located in Chattanooga. Hey, shout out to a listener in Chattanooga. I know you might be there. We went there probably every weekend with my parents. It was a really cool place. They had all kinds of antiques, pretty much a museum, but everything's for sale. Sadly, they're closed now. This experience happened when I was 15. My mom and I had to go to a restroom, and they had men and women's restrooms. So while I waited on my mom, I was looking at the mirror over the sink trying to see if I had done my eye makeup right. Because when you're 15, makeup skills are important. So while I'm looking in the mirror, I see behind me a woman walk in. Didn't see really what she looked like, but I could tell she was wearing something dark navy colored. I was really focused if I had done my eyeliner right around my eyes, and she was walking across the bathroom toward the end of the toilet stall. It got real quiet, like I didn't hear the stall door open or close, or footsteps, so I'm thinking she's standing against the wall waiting or something. Turn to look and no one. I look over and see the end stall doors halfway open. I go to look and no one's in there, and immediately I'm freaking out. I told my mom we needed to go. Now. When we got out, I told her and my dad what happened. And now that I type this, I don't remember ever hearing the door open when she walked in, or footsteps. So I think I saw a ghost. We went to the antique mall still and used the restrooms, but I didn't goof around with the mirrors anymore. Hardly looked in the mirror. I'd go to the bathroom and I'd get out as soon as possible. She's probably attached to whatever was in the antique mall. But they'd actually put antiques for sale in the women's restrooms that serve as decor, like pictures, a dressing table, antique brushes, and a handheld mirror. That's cool. My grandma lived in a haunted house. My grandma and her family used to live in a small area in Tennessee. Her parents, siblings, and she moved into an old farmhouse. This was in the 50s. I asked her how old she thought the house was, like a specific date, but she said that she didn't know. It was definitely old, though. In the night, they would hear a door open and shut in the house. All night long, really. The sound of a cat screech. Finally, her daddy had had enough and removed the hinges and replaced them with leather hinges to see if it would stop the door from opening and shutting. It didn't. It still kept doing it. Open, shut. And that sound of a cat screeching. Also, under this house was enough room for her and her siblings to play underneath. The house was set up on high-end stones, and there was no skirting underneath the home, so it was just open. Somebody had tried to build a cellar, but never finished it. Apparently, it was to connect to the home. On the ground, every day they went down, they would find balls of long hair that looked grayish, like woman's hair. And underneath the hair was coins and change. They would just toss the hair and get the coins. Again, no explanation for this. One day, Grandma's mama got sick. So, great-great-grandma, which was Grandma's mom's mother, came over to help with the kids and help her daughter. Interesting side fact was that great-great-grandma was Cherokee, but she would never ever admit to it if asked. She would always claim Black Dutch. She was terrified of being taken to Oklahoma to a reservation. Anyway, great-great-grandma only stayed one night. Got ready to leave before the sun came up. Grandma said her mama asked why she was leaving, to which she replied, "I seen a man and his wife pass through the dresser and into the wall. The wife was missing her head. I ain't staying in this house." She left and she never came back to the house. Across from the house where they lived and across a road was an open field. In the field was a large 3-story home, a rancher-type house. In its heyday, it must have been beautiful, but now it looked weathered. The paint was peeling and just looked like it had seen better days. Every night on the top floor in one of the windows, everybody saw candlelight flickering. Grandma's dad was curious, so one day, during sunlight of course, he walked over to the old house to see where the light could be coming from. If anybody was living there, the kids came along too. Great-grandpa walked inside, and the house on the inside looked worse. There was no way somebody could go upstairs to the top floor because the stairs had basically rotted away completely. Meanwhile, Grandma's half-sister went to the cellar door of the old house and opened it. Down in the cellar was an old, tacky-looking man. He looked up and said to her, "Come on in." Her sister slammed the door and ran. There were no steps that led into the cellar. I don't think they ever went back over to that ranch house ever again. They stayed in this house from when my grandma was 8 till she was 11 and the family moved. If there's any more details to this story that I've missed, I'll ask her, and I'll add it. Haunted home when I was little. We moved in this home around 2000 or 2001. That would make me 3 or 4 years old. Honestly, after moving in, it felt like our lives had went downhill. I honestly believe there was something evil in that house. My mom says the first night she slept in the house, she dreamed of a thick fog and a black cat. She woke up and remembers telling Dad that they messed up buying the house. It gave her a feeling of dread. My grandma on my dad's side and my mom was sitting in the living room. That was while I was sitting on the floor playing. I don't remember this because I was so young. But she said all we heard was a man groan behind the door. She says my eyes got real big and I said, "Whoa." The house looked like it was from the 90s, and one of the rooms in one of the rooms, where for a while we used as a junk room, that's where we just put odds and ends and things in there. There were outlines of where posters had been on the walls, and the space was white where the poster had been. The rest of the walls had a yellow tinge. I'm guessing it's where somebody had smoked a lot. Also, where our back door was. That's where our washer and dryer would be in our utility room. There were tiny scratches at the bottom of the door, the one that separated the utility room from the kitchen, almost like cat scratches. And there was a door in my parents' room, and at the bottom of the door there was those same scratches. Things were heard, felt, and seen in that house. I remember when I was around 6 or 7, I thought I'd seen the back room out of the corner of my eye. Something white, like a white dress with a long train going from one side to the other side of the room. And it was dark. Might have been my imagination, but I can't swear it. I would have dreams where I would try and run out of one of the rooms and just couldn't. I couldn't scream. I felt my legs went numb, and it was like I couldn't run away, like something will be waiting for me, dragging me back. My mom woke up one morning and seen what she thought was my dad at the end of the bed. It was a work day. She thought that maybe he had come back home too early. It was a man, she said, with red hair. And by the way, my dad has red hair. He was wearing like a blue workman's uniform, like a boiler suit, but separate pants and a shirt. Then she looked back and the man was gone. My grandma and grandpa, who was on hospice, he was sort of in a roll-around bed. He stayed with us in the house so my mom could help give medication to grandpa. My grandma had a dream where she'd seen the man with red hair and beard in the bathroom in the mirror over the sink. My grandpa was scared for the light to be turned off. At this time, my parents would argue, like all the time. Anybody who stayed in the house, it was like the tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I was having problems of my own, too. I was depressed nearly all the time. I always felt like I was being watched, like there was always something just watching me. I would look behind my shoulder, and of course there'd be nothing. My grandma had felt one time something get into the bed with her. And the way she described it, it was like a big dog. She would kick it out of the bed, half asleep, and it would get back into the bed with her, and kick it out, get back in, till it would finally stop. I remember my mom and I watching, oddly enough, The Ghost and Mrs. Moyer, 1947, in my parents' bedroom. That's when all of a sudden we heard this loud bang. Like, the only way I can describe it, it's like somebody took a concrete block and threw it as hard as they could against the floor in the bathroom, or like maybe the closet floor. We jumped up and we looked. Nothing had fell. But it was so loud, and it definitely sounded like it was coming from their closet. Their closet was huge. It was a deep walk-in closet. My grandma was up one morning just taking care of Grandpa. That's when she said she started hearing sounds of wire hangers violently hitting the sides of the closet wall. She knocked on my parents' door, and she thought that my mom had gotten into a fight with my dad and just was packing his stuff, or hers, and was jerking clothes off the hangers. You know, letting him hit all the closet walls and make loud noise. She found out that my parents were still asleep. My mom sat on the couch one day and felt something furry rub up against her leg, like a cat, but there wasn't a cat there. And this happened twice. Second time, she felt it pull on her shirt, too. Grandma and Mom said they were sitting on the couch. And apparently, they had heard a sort of picking sound, like a cat sharpening its nail on a treadmill. Do cats do that? That's cool. There were marks on the treadmill from cat claws, but no cat, and we didn't have a cat. Halloween, my mom put out a step mat, and we had this for years. And when you stepped on it, a man's voice would say, "Happy Halloween!" It was kind of cute, step mat, purple with an orange pumpkin. Went off by itself like somebody had stepped on it. She ripped out the voice box and step sensor mechanism. Other things happened, but this post is already too long, and some things I just can't remember. All I know is that finally we had enough. Moved out when I was about 8 or 9. My mom says she believes that there was a ghost of a cat there. She didn't think it was bad. She kind of felt sorry for it. An unexplained experience I had counseling at summer camp some years ago. I can't fall asleep right now. Figured I'd share my one and only potentially paranormal encounter. It happened when I was 15. About 6 or 7 years ago, when I finally grew old enough to become a counselor at a summer camp I had attended annually for most of my childhood. The camp is in Camo Anokijik. It's in Plymouth, Wisconsin, if you want to check it out. Spelled Camo, C-A-M-O, Anokijig, A-N-O-K-I-J-I-G. You would imagine that a summer camp as large and old as Anokijig would have its fair share of scary stories and camp legends. But from my experience, that really wasn't the case. Ghost stories around the campfire were, of course, popular, but they aren't really any specifically about the camp itself. That is, except one commonly accepted notion among the staff. Thunderbird Cabin 2 is haunted. See, the camp is separated into boys' and girls' sides. These sides are further divided into sections with names like Lakeview, Timber Trail, or, of course, Thunderbird. Counselors would rotate through sections throughout the summer. During the particular week of the story, I was stationed in Thunderbird, and was assigned with another counselor, who I'm going to call Keegan, to watch over the infamous Cabin 2. Stories about the Cabin 2 varied. entities outside of the windows, goat men, scratching sounds at odd hours of the night, whatever. The diverse and often hyperbolized nature of these stories actually led me to doubt the legitimacy of all of them. It's a much more likely explanation that there was a desire for ghost stories at camp and that somebody just came up with Thunderbird 2 is haunted. Which just happened to stick, you know? I still kind of believe this, in fact. I don't really believe in ghosts or the paranormal, but I know what I experienced, and any rational explanation I can come up with doesn't seem to fully convince me. Anyways, it goes as follows. This week I was assigned to watch the youngest group of boys, about 6 to 8. We like to have everybody in bed early since the young kids can be restless. They needed time to wind down, and this particular night things went smoothly for Keegan and I. We'd gotten all of the kids seemingly asleep rather quickly. Being a little bit older, we would stay up and chat or read, and this night was no different. We both sat in Keegan's bunk sharing a pair of earbuds and watching YouTube videos. It's important now to describe the layout of cabin of Thunderbird. They were simplistic and rectangular, raised wooden cabins. The inner perimeter was lined with bunk beds and housed about 20, maybe 30 campers. 2 counselors. Small, high-set rectangular windows along all sides, providing moderate moonlight at night. Anyways, we're watching a video and all the kids are asleep. It's dead quiet outside and inside. You can barely hear the crackling of the dwindling campfire and the muffled normal sounds of a Midwest forest at night. And, well, that is until something disturbs the peace. The unmistakable sound of somebody shaking in a sleeping bag breaks the silence. It's clear from the noise and vibrations that one of the campers is basically flailing in their bunk. Their sleeping bag is rustling, the metal bunk is squeaking. The sound of their body bouncing on the mattress makes a dull thumping. Keegan and I quickly just take out our earbuds, pause for a moment, and listen to the sound. We turn to each other with a concerned, "What the hell?" look on our faces. Initially, I'm actually worried a camper's having a seizure. And then on the other side of the cabin, we hear the same noise. The same vibration. Only a few seconds after the first camper started to shake. Second one joins in. Then another, and another. Within 7 or 8 seconds, literally every fucking kid in this cabin is flailing in their bags. The sound of rustling fabric and straining bed springs is all you can hear. In the pale of the moonlight, you could also see the outlines of their bodies bouncing around a little bit. The entire cabin is vibrating at this point, and Keegan and I are now frozen, wide-eyed, and terrified. We each have had the same frightened look, and it's clear that neither of us have any idea on what's going on or what to do. We sit paralyzed. We sit like this for some period of time while the collective possession around us is continuing. After 15 or maybe 20 seconds of this, the cacophony stops, like a switch is flipped. All the campers stop moving and go perfectly still, back to sleeping undisturbed. Still immobilized with fear, Keegan and I sit completely still as well, not talking or moving. We're scared, and I'm assuming that this was simply the beginning of something worse. Unsure whether to run or check at the campers, minutes go by and both of us are looking around. Our eyes are darting to the door and the surrounding bunks, and both of us are just braced for impending doom. I'm not sure how, but at the same time, both of us silently conclude that we should bolt. As fast as we can, we leap from the bunk and sprint out the door into the clearing and accompanying the cabins. The only person still outside is our senior counselor scrolling through his phone by the fire. He's surprised to see 2 counselors of a cabin dash out the way we did. Panicked, we try to explain what the hell happened. He tries to brush it off, but he does agree to check the cabin. As you can guess, he doesn't see or hear anything but peacefully sleeping campers. We reluctantly return to the cabin and get to our beds. High alert, I lie awake for some time, braced and waiting for something. But alas, I drift off at some point, and wouldn't you believe it? In the morning, none of the kids claimed to know anything about the night previous. They all claimed to have fallen asleep like any other night, and the phenomenon does not continue any following night either. As somebody who is wholly skeptical and, as previously stated, does not believe in anything not well founded or observed scientifically, I struggle to think what might have caused this. I want to think if it was a prank, but I just don't think that a bunch of young children could coordinate something like this so well, or even, well, I don't think they could retain their innocence in the matter. If anybody has any similar stories or even heard of anything that could cause this, I'm all ears. Probably be the most confused and scared I'll ever be in my life. The situation was so bizarre and sudden. Hope I properly conveyed just how creepy it was. The Hellfire Club. Growing up, my father told me a lot of stories from his youth. One such grouping of stories was around a place we both visited numerous times as children. High up in the Dublin Wicklow Mountains, overlooking the city of Dublin, is a place known as Montpelier Hill. It's an amazing sight for those who haven't been there, especially during the dark hours. I would attach photos, but this sub doesn't allow it. On this hill lies an old ruin of a stone-built lodge known as the Hellfire Club. The Hellfire Club was once home to a group of young aristocrats who would do as young aristocrats would do back then: card games, drinking, and revelry, but also the most debauched satanic practices as well. It is told the club was built on an ancient burial ground, which was marked by giant stone monuments reminiscent of Stonehenge, and those stone cairns would also be used in the construction. Nearby to this lodge is a home known as Killicky House, which was supposedly also used by the Hellfire Club on occasion. The usual story of the Hellfire Club Lodge is one many of us have heard before. A stormy night, whilst the aristocrats were playing cards and drinking, they heard a knock on the door. A well-dressed stranger entered. They asked to join their game. He consistently beat them at every card game until he was accused of cheating. One of the aristocrats pulled on his sleeve and a card fell to the floor. As he looked under the card table to see where the card landed, he found the stranger had 2 hooves for feet, and in a puff of fire and smoke, the stranger disappeared. This is probably fiction, but other accounts point to it maybe having some truth. In the 1800s, Dublin was home to the biggest red light district in Europe. One night, a young prostitute visited the Hellfire Club, and it said she was murdered by being placed in an old wooden barrel that was set on fire and rolled down the steep hill in front of the Hellfire Club Lodge. Her ghost is heard wailing. That's all the way through the adjacent forests, and in the Hellfire Club itself during the month of October around Halloween. A young dwarf boy is also said to have perished in this club. He was invited as a guest, but sacrificed in a ritual by the young aristocrats, which also involved sacrificing black cats. Bastards. To this day, the bones of sacrificed cats are still found deep in the forests of the Wicklow Mountains, which many believe are still used by satanic cults. County Wicklow is the only Irish county with a very high rate of Protestants whose families would link back to the lords and aristocrats of those days. In the early 70s, during renovations of a nearby Killicky house, the bones of a young dwarf boy were found alongside an effigy and a horned demon. During the renovations of this house, my father named 1 or 2 of his father's friends who were working there at his. They claimed that they had seen a dog-sized black cat roaming the home. Had a large burning red eye, and when they stayed there overnight, as it was a tough journey back to Dublin City, they locked doors, and they'd open by themselves constantly. They all left during the early hours of the morning as soon as dawn broke. Couldn't find their way down the mountain during dark. Not a single one stayed to collect their wages or finish the job. The owners of this house had also seen the devilish black cat numerous times, but refused to move out. Months later, the family finally found a painter who would finish off the work of those who had left. On the day he began his work, the front door was locked behind him in fear of someone perhaps burgling the home whilst he was in there. Suddenly, the door burst open. A dark figure approached him, warning him that the door must always remain open or there would be consequences. He didn't finish the job and hurried away from the house once the shadow had disappeared. He looked back, seeing the shadow standing in the door in front of his eyes, and he swore the figure turned into a giant black cat with devil's eyes and started to laugh in a guttural voice. Many years later, an Irish television crew went to the home. They went to try to catch footage of this experience at the home. They found nothing but the night a dark substance like oil poured down each wall inside. Soon after, a priest was called to bless the home and try to rid of whatever haunted it. Since then, all apparitions had stopped pretty much, and the family continued with their lives. A few years later, a group of young actors had stayed in the home as guests. They decided to have a seance. During the seance, it's said that home's pottery and paintings were ripped from the shelves and walls and smashed by an unknown force. Many things materialized from thin air, including coins from past centuries and from far-off countries, along with sightings of 2 nuns and a black cat. Later, a psychic would investigate the home and discover that the nuns were women who had participated in the satanic rituals of centuries past, and the black cat was a demon the club had unsuccessfully tried to conjure. The painter who last worked in the home painted a picture of a black cat that he had seen. For anybody who's interested, I can DM them that. Something happened again. Where I live, it's a very old house. My apartment is ground level, and my neighbor's above me. Old landlord houses in Dublin are basically 2 levels, with one top level being accessed from the main set of maybe 20 steps up. That's where the landlord would have lived. My entrance is through the garden, with my door to the side of these steps, where the scullery maids, etc. would have cooked and probably lived too. When you enter my doorway, we have a little hall and a small door to the left that would be kind of a basement room directly below my neighbor's outside steps. To the right is a long hallway with my bedroom to the right, and directly facing it is a spare bedroom. It's a very big apartment. Since I moved in last year, I get bad feelings from the spare room, so mostly I try to avoid it and let my girlfriend do the cleaning, if we have guests staying over. A few months ago, we both witnessed something that really creeped me out, but not to the extent of 2 nights ago. We were both chilling in the living room watching TV at night, and we had some of my clothes drying on like a clothing rack in front of us. One of the jumper sleeves raised itself into the air and then dropped again, like if somebody was packing a suitcase. They pulled the sleeve out to fold it. There was no breeze or draft, etc., and all the windows were closed and nothing else moved at the time. We both looked at each other to acknowledge that we'd both seen, but continued watching TV. It was weird. Sometimes at night, when I'm turning the lights off as I sleep later with my girlfriend, I feel something watching me in this darkness. 2 days ago, my girlfriend told me that our landlord's family have lived in the house for over 200 years. He's a very odd man, so I tend not to get along with him that much, and I said some shit about him lightheartedly about him being weird. That night, I went to bed quite early for myself, which was maybe 11:40 p.m. My girlfriend had college, and the next day she was asleep already. I was lying in bed with the door closed, scrolling on my phone, when I heard the doors start to open and close. They're heavy old wooden doors, so they creak when they open and close. I'm used to like a slight breeze at this time of year, sweeping through the house and the noise of the doors that go along with it. This wasn't a slight breeze. It continued for like 10 minutes until I realized maybe my girlfriend had left the bedroom window open, which she never even does, but maybe that's why this whole noise was happening. The doors were banging shut and open pretty constantly. As soon as they would open, they'd shut again. Never heard before whilst living here. That's when I heard something walking in her hallway. We have carpet flooring in each bedroom and in the hall. I could hear footsteps trudging along the carpet between the spare bedroom and into the hall. This continued for maybe 5 minutes as I was getting more freaked out of the seconds I got all these sounds I could hear. To the point I rang my little sister who lives with her dad and told her something could have broken into the apartment. I grew up in a rough neighborhood, so it's natural for me to keep a weapon near my bedside. In this case, it's a little hatchet. I didn't want to wake my girlfriend just in case, and I told my sister if I didn't message her in 5 minutes something had happened, and to send my dad up straight away. I built up the courage to open my bedroom door into the pitch-black hallway. As I turned on the hallway light, everything went silent. No doors banging or creaking or footsteps. The spare bedroom has a computer table with a desk chair that's always underneath it. The chair was out from under the desk and it was facing me. At this stage, I still half believed somebody had broken in. Maybe it was just to keep my adrenaline pumping for fear of it being something else. I went room to room, turning the lights on and waiting for someone or something in one of the rooms, and I found nothing. No windows open, nothing. Kept all the lights on, went outside to have a cigarette to calm my nerves and text my sister. I prayed outside for my deceased family members, and hopefully they'd always watch over and protect me, and I went back to bed making sure to keep my bedside lamp on. I didn't put the hatchet down until I was in bed. I was frickin' freaked out. Within 20 minutes I heard the footsteps again in the hallway. They lasted for some time, and when they stopped, I finally went to sleep. On a side note, one of my neighbors has a black cat. I don't know which neighbor, though. But he started to come into my apartment through the back garden window as I laid food out for him. We bonded since. I have no pets here, and both my dogs passed away a long time ago. For some reason, he always walks into that spare bedroom. I'm beginning to hate this place. My experiences as an Irishman in a very old town. Bullet points are going to be used in some instances. I can't remember exact ages or dates and what order things happened in. I feel ya. I live in an extremely old part of an old city in Ireland. A city which has been uncountable bloodshed and war, or which has seen uncountable bloodshed and war. To us locals, it's known as Dublin Town. Where I live with my family, they've lived for generations. We come from very old Irish bloodlines, and this will matter later in the story. My street is now made of tarmac, but it was once old cobblestones. I have numerous neighbors who have heard of the sounds of horses clopping outside during the night hours, and those of you who know the sound of horses on cobble know it's unique. This is an extremely minor part. My great-grandfather lived at the top of an adjacent laneway. So, what we know as tenement housing. Story goes, one night, he's on his way home from work in the very early morning hours, and he heard a low growl coming from behind him. When he turned, he saw a large black dog with burning red eyes at the bottom of the lane. This lane is a steep hill, maybe 100 feet long. It's quite narrow. He ran to the door facing down the lane and proceeded to make his way up into the room where his wife and children lived, including my grandfather. His room faced the laneway and was 2 or 3 floors up. As he looked out the window, he saw the black, red-eyed dog sitting at the top of the lane, maybe 20 feet from his tenement door, staring up at him. And this dog is not a good Irish omen. My oldest daughter once seen what she thinks was the banshee as she walked home from a night of partying in the early 1980s. A woman dressed in white, combing her hair and what sounded like unnatural crying. She was sitting atop a 20-foot-high wall. My uncle, who's from a different country and is extremely pragmatic, he was once driving through the countryside. At least he swears he'd seen one of the little people, a leprechaun, sitting behind a bush. Now I will begin my own personal stories. I apologize for the length of this post, but I feel it's time to share my experiences. As a child myself, and my 3 siblings shared the same bedroom. Sadly, when my mother was pregnant on my little sister, she was hit by a car. My sister suffered from some health problems when she was born. One night, when we were around 7, maybe 8 years old, I woke up to the sound of my little sister having a conversation in the pitch-black room. I slept on the top bunk, and I'll never forget peering over and groggily asking her what she's doing. She was sitting on a chair and told me she was talking to her grandfather, sounding pretty excited too. Our grandfather had passed away a few years earlier. That's when my family realized she was special. Due to the circumstances surrounding her birth, she was not meant to survive. But against all odds, she did. When I was around 12, myself and my little brother, who was maybe 8 or 9, were alone in her bedroom. We'd stayed up very late playing games as young siblings usually do. Parents, thinking we were asleep. Our bedroom was ground floor, and the windows faced the same huge old slate wall that my aunt had seen the banshee decades earlier, and that's when we heard it. I can't describe the exact sound, but it will forever be etched into my memory. I've heard all sorts of urban foxes fighting, wildcats fighting, and it was an unnatural crying. It was sort of like a guttural thing, but also high-pitched screeching, like the sound of a cat being mutilated on our windowsill. Both in terror, we froze. My little brother being a curious kid, wanted to go look out. I stopped him, and I remembered what our father had told us. Explanation at the end. He asked me what it could be, maybe in the hopes of being the oldest brother I would have some sort of natural explanation. I dared not say it out loud in fear that she would hear us come for us and whispered out our father's warning. It lasted what felt like hours, but may have just been a few minutes, and slowly made its way away from our house. The sound of it moving into the distance, whilst it was still making that fear-inducing sound, it'll never leave me. Shortly after, we got into the bed that was beside each other, and we both agreed that we had heard the banshee. Our father once warned us of a woman with long black hair covering her face. She would wear a white dress and be combing her hair. And to those who come across her, she would appear to be crying and ask for help. If you speak to her or look at her in her face, you'll die, or one of your family will come to serious harm. He had some stories of his father passed on and so forth, but I can't remember them. This was before I heard of any of my own sightings. The reason I'm writing these posts is because of, it happened recently. And because of that, I asked my little brother if he would be experiencing these things as kids. Sadly, he didn't. I don't think I'll ever forget, but just in case, I want to have my experiences somewhat not personal, but also easy to find. Somehow, this feels safe. I'm going to begin by explaining what I know of the banshee, as I didn't in my last post. She's a protector, but also an omen. She's particular to ancient Irish bloodlines, by the way, and she won't appear to all. A few months ago, I'm working all over the country with a friend of mine. We set off from Dublin at around 7 a.m., and the van we were in was not running smoothly. Long story short, it had a dropped fuel injector. Against all advice to drive back to Dublin, we continued on our journey. What should have been a 14-hour workday in 3 different counties turned into a 24-hour workday. As we left the coast of County Clare at 1:30 a.m., having finished all of our work, we headed back home exhausted and hungry. It was a stupid thing to do, but we both were hard-working men, and a 4-hour drive didn't seem too bad. But I was wrong. During the drive, my friend, who's an Eastern European, not that it matters, was constantly falling asleep behind the wheel, and as I had no license yet, I couldn't drive in his place. I had a very strong feeling that if I fell asleep, we'd both die. I had to shake him awake numerous times, whilst also fighting to sleep myself. We had 2 hours left before we reached Dublin. That's when I had seen her. A white figure like a bright human-shaped fog facing me on the road. It was clear all around the motorway, but this one figure straight in front of me, maybe 20 meters away, I know it wasn't sleep deprivation. I had seen nothing before or nothing after. As we approached her, the urge to sleep finally took over me, and for some reason I told myself I'm gonna die if I sleep. But I just can't stay awake any longer. I closed my eyes and I drifted into sleep. Where she was, the road diverted into a slipway behind her, and I heard my friend's voice clearly and loudly asking me if I was awake. I woke up straight away, and I found my friend fast asleep behind the wheel. We were headed straight for the diversion at the center of the road. A crash like that will no doubt kill all involved. And again, I just shook my friend awake, having grabbed the wheel and steered us back into the road. Never told him about what I had seen, and only told my girlfriend. It's what spurred me to write this records of events, really. Since then, I can't shake the feeling I was protected by the banshee or some spirit. Maybe even my mother. I will now continue my other experiences. It only feels right to do so. Maybe they'll help someone somehow. Once as a child, I woke up to see a floating skull facing me in my bedroom. I was in my top bunk, staring through those safety bars. The whiteness of the skull shone out against the darkness of the room. It wasn't close to me, really, nor did I feel threatened, but I can't explain what it was. Hollowed out eyes. When I was 13 years old, I slept in my grandmother's house. The bottom of my bed faced the window. It was on the 2nd floor, and the window was open. I woke during the night to hear a voice calling me, and I felt a presence coming in through the open window. I don't know whether it was teenage hormones, but I was asking me to sleep with it. Or rather, it was. And years later, I read about incubus or succubus, and to this day, I think it may have been one. My mother passed away a few years ago, and during that time, I hated life. And I hated myself more than life. Never experienced mental health problems before or after this experience, though. One day, I'm alone in my bedroom when I had a sudden urge to hurt myself. Stabbed myself in the thigh with a pencil and felt a rush due to the hatred I had for myself. At that moment, a book fell off my shelf. No window or door was open, so no wind or draft could have moved this heavy book. I believe in that moment my mother was letting me know that she's watching over me and I'm not alone anymore. Other occurrences have happened, but they've sort of compounded this fact that I have a guardian watching over me always. A close friend of mine is what we call an Irish traveler. To most, it would be an Irish gypsy, but I find both have semi-prejudiced meanings. Their language has some ancient Gaelic vocabulary not spoken in a very long time by the majority of the Irish. Their bloodlines also contain some very ancient Irish too. This is the story of one. In that group of people, arranged marriage is quite common. It's frowned upon to marry without prearrangements. The story goes one such arrangement between two families was agreed upon, but somehow the soon-to-be groom's family found out the soon-to-be wife was sleeping with a man from a different clan. The marriage was called off, and the oldest women in both families met to discuss the terms of the failed marriage, to stop the bloodshed that would begin between the men of both clans. The groom's grandmother warned the consequences of such were dire, and the aforementioned wife would never breed a child, nor would any of her kin. The wife's family took this with a pinch of salt. It's better to hear some loose words than have a war between the clans, which would undoubtedly cause a great amount of blood to be spilled on both sides. Years went by, and the wife married the man she had been sleeping with. She chose love over the wishes of both families. Good girl. Many women she called kin would be pregnant over this time, but all would suffer heartache during pregnancy and lose the children. This is not a fable, but a true story. Maybe not good. Oops. Now, this woman was married to the man she loved and wanted children of her own, soon becoming pregnant herself. Again, heartache ensued, and the child passed away in childbirth. A decade had passed since the clan had broke the marriage agreement, and not a single child had been born. The oldest of the clan went to see another clan, as they had known to have a witch or a medicine woman. The medicine woman told her that the bloodline had been cursed, and the demonic spirit of a black horse would forever be attached to them. Thus, no children would be born unless the original clan who cursed them could destroy the curse. This is when she remembered the old conversation she had with the other elderly woman many years ago, pleading to meet this woman again for conversation to put things right. The young wife became pregnant again, and during this time the eldest of her clan met with the eldest woman of the original groom's clan, pleading with them to take off the curse as it had ruined the lives of many. Not sure why or how, but they decided to destroy the curse, and the wife gave birth to a healthy child, the first to be born in a decade. My friend who told me this doesn't really believe in ghosts or the like, but he knows these curses are real and just named this as one of the many examples. It's something I will never forget. My brother was 16 years old. He had a girlfriend from the local area. None of my family really liked her, as she didn't seem good for him. Concerned for his mental health when he was with her due to her being a bad influence. One night, not long after my grandmother had passed away, they decided to stay in my grandmother's home to keep one of my aunt's company. My grandmother was extremely opposed to them dating and was basically the matriarch of her whole family. They made the mistake this night of staying in her bed. Supposedly, the girl woke up during the night to see a dark shadow standing next to her, peering into her face. This girl was not one of the spiritual kind, nor did she believe in ghosts. She woke my brother, and both of them soon left the house. Never returned, and they broke up shortly after. This dark shadow has never been seen in the house before or after. It's actually a home I feel quite calm and always feel like my grandmother's loving presence is still there somehow. I've slept there numerous times on my own since then, even in my grandmother's old bed. Not once have I felt threatened or seen anything. My strange encounter with the black UFO. This happened to me approximately 15 years ago. I've tried to rationalize what happened to me so many times over the years and convince myself it never happened or that I was dreaming. But each time I do that, I keep coming back to how well I remembered things about that day. I remember exactly what I was wearing. I remember the exact feel of the chilly breeze against my skin that day, and I remember the feeling of the cold stone step I was sitting on. I never remembered a dream with such clarity. I had a bad childhood, grew up very poor. When this happened, I was maybe 17 years old. So between 4 and 5 p.m. on an autumn evening, and I just had one of many huge arguments with me and my grandmother and my brother. I'd left the house in anger. I sat down on the step outside to get away from them. Pretty much as soon as I sat down, I looked up into the sky above the houses opposite where I lived. I saw this huge black thing was silently hovering overhead. I've tried and tried over the years to be able to describe it better than a thing, but I just can't. I've tried drawing it, and again, I just can't seem to get it right. You know how a stealth aircraft has lots of angles to it? That's the closest thing I can compare it to. Except it looked like no human aircraft I've ever seen. It looked as if it had windows on the front, and I definitely got the impression that just as I was staring at it, transfixed, whoever or whatever was inside of this thing was scrutinizing me as it hovered motionlessly. Silent, it was just hovering in the sky above me. I have no idea how long I stared at it for. It could have been a long time or just a few seconds. But I remember I felt absolutely no fear whatsoever during any of this. Only a sense of astonishment at what I was seeing and wondering if anybody else was seeing what I was. I don't remember seeing any other people on the street at that time, nor any vehicles passing. And that's my story. I have no memory of what happened after I saw it, nor do I remember taking my eyes off of it. I'd forgotten about the whole thing for a number of years, until a random conversation with my girlfriend somehow made me remember it. I've since researched the strange and paranormal and read somewhere that these types of encounters can occur to younger people, or those who are going through periods of heightened emotional stress. I realize people are going to call me crazy or mock me for what happened, but I know what I saw, and I'd be very interested to get opinions. It couldn't have been the dog. A couple of months ago, my sister and I were house or dog sitting 2 corgis for a coworker of my mom's. My sister had stayed at the house an entire week when I came home from school to stay the last 2 nights with her. Absolutely nothing had happened all week, pretty much. She felt completely safe. I finished my homework downstairs by myself on the last night at midnight, went up to bed, and the dogs followed. My sister, the dogs, and I were all piled up into bed together when we decided it was time to sleep around 1. Not even a minute after I had shut my eyes, the dogs bolted off the bed downstairs, barking like crazy. My sister and I heard nothing that could have set them off, but I remembered I had mistakenly left my keys on the driver's seat, so maybe my car was being stolen. My sister was urging me to grab my keys, but I was too busy focusing on any noise downstairs or outside. I didn't budge off the bed when the dogs promptly stopped barking, which my sister thought nothing of. However, nothing would have made them stop if something else hadn't stopped them. We held still and continued to listen. My sister called for one of the dogs, and she came running up the wooden stairs, laid on the floor by the open door inside the room. The others were starting to come up the stairs, but stopping every couple of seconds. It wasn't until the last 8-ish steps that were very clearly heard footsteps trying to be disguised with the dogs. My sister slammed the door shut, and we were beyond terrified that there was an intruder. When they reached the landing at the top of the stairs, it went quiet for a few seconds. Then suddenly, a very clear 3 knock as if you were knocking on a front door with your knuckles followed. To say we screamed at the top of our lungs is definitely an understatement. Not funny, but, well, funny now. My sister dials the police, and while on the phone, the sensor light above the garage goes off. At this point, we were very convinced it was an intruder. They arrived 10 minutes later and instruct us to let them in the house, which took a lot of convincing. They checked the entire property and declare that we had the house locked up like a fortress. No sign of anything being stolen or even out of place. We decided to go to our house as we were too spooked and contacted the homeowners who checked the Ring camera the next morning. Just 2 cats. Couldn't possibly have been a way for the dogs to hear the cats in the driveway, or have a corgi being replicating 3 crisp knocks on a door. They don't have tails, and jumping up on the door isn't nearly the sound we heard, not to mention the footsteps on the stairs. In the 15 years of homeowners living here, well, they've had nothing happen. They insist it was just the dogs. Any ideas or information on what paranormal activity it could have been? Or what 3 knocks could have signified?